a sudden these people were accused of being terrorist sympathisers. And what happened in the 60s and the 70s was that these lawyers went on to promote racial equality, the provision of law centres, the resistance to obscenity laws, women's rights, representing squatters, drug takers, immigrants, militant strikers, trade unions, and the miners' strike in 1984 provided the last great explosion of political anger and unity for lawyers within this country. But what has happened since, unfortunately, has been a decline in radicals, lawyers who are with a hostile attitude to law. And I think the most important reason for radical lawyers' decline has been that some of what actually they say in the 60s and 70s has been accepted as sensible and necessary. To have suggested, as the radicals did in court cases in the 60s and 70s, that the police were capable of actually lying and concocting evidence was deeply offensive to the judiciary. Young radical lawyers are not so easily spotted today, because it's not just because there's a lack of causes. Sometimes people say to me, oh, there's a lack of causes, there's not really the same stuff that was going on in the 60s and 70s. I've been through a whole list of causes for you, of what's going on. It doesn't have to be Guantanamo. It can just be some person living in a scheme who's been thrown out of a house, who's losing their liberty, or who are having their lives destroyed. Or people at this present point in time where you're seeing the government going after single-parent mothers, the government going after working-class people for what they call benefit fraud, yet the ones who have robbed this system blind have absolutely no resources diverted in their direction to actually go after them full scale. You actually see the serious fraud squad getting their expenditure cut. You actually see trials collapsing on a massive basis. And I'm conscious that I said that I would speak for about 20 minutes. But as I said, that if I get an opportunity to speak, then I'll just keep speaking. So what I want to finish off, because I'd actually quite like to hear from people or questions and stuff, but I want to finish off with a memory of 1991. So it's actually it'll be 19 years ago this November, of why I became a lawyer. I came to Glasgow University to study engineering and to actually join the Royal Air Force. It was in 1986. And through coming to Glasgow University, I became involved politically in a campaign against racism in the dental school, which eventually led to anonymous marking for all faculties throughout the university, where we saw a number of students being kicked out, and we ran a campaign to have them to return to the university. We ran a campaign to have anonymous marking, because we said, why should lecturers know if you're male or female? Why should they know if you're black or white? Why they should know if you're Catholic or Protestant? There shouldn't be a need for that. You should mark your exam papers blindly, etc. There was a CRE form of an investigation into it. And as a result of that, it became politicised. I decided the one thing I was not going to do was go into the Royal Air Force and go off and fly planes or build planes to actually go and bomb people. And eventually what happened was in 1991, prior to that, I'd would describe myself as a socialist. As students, we led a series of occupations across the country where principals' offices, and I'd wholly recommend it if you haven't done it. Go and occupy when the time comes. The principal's office of students and ask them to do that, because it's great. It gets them to listen to you. You can make a series of demands. Because that one time we did occupy, we demanded anonymous marking, and within a few weeks' time, we had anonymous marking introduced for all the faculties within Glasgow University. But that night, several of us went out onto the edge of the campus. We were sticking up posters. I think it was November the 5th, 1991. Sticking up posters in the lane while two people kept watch for the police. And under usual circumstances, the police would confiscate our posters, or they would charge us. And if they very rarely charge us, because it wasn't worth the hassle, we would charge under the Environmental Health Act, Fly Postering Act, and you got fined £25. And what happened at that time was putting up posters on Ashton Lane, just by Byers Road, and somebody shouted out police. I was with, I think I was in my, I'd become a permanent student by then. All I did was kept changing faculty, because I just wanted to be a political cameraman. And I'm sure there's a few faces around here I see like that who don't actually go to the studies, but just go around selling papers and saying, come out to the demonstration. Well, that was me, as like, come to this demonstration, come to that demonstration. And at that point in time, we would get caught, we would be normally released, but I was sticking up posters, and somebody shouted out police. We had a number of first years with us who were keeping watch, so we thought, well, let's run this way. We ran up Ashton Lane, so I shouted out, let's go towards the Queen Margaret Union. And I ran behind where Ginty McGinty's is now, up through the grass bit. And I was chased, and I could hear the footsteps behind me, and I thought I had the bucket and the poster still in my hand. I thought, I'm not going to let go of these, because we were printing them off on the principal's photocopy, and we had thousands of posters and leaflets, and I thought, not losing these to the cops. Just kept running and running, and then eventually I was grabbed from behind, and I shouted, or I stopped as I came down on the ground, and I could feel somebody in the back of me. I knew it was a policeman, and the next thing I knew was my head was being pulled back My face was smashed off the concrete, and I felt my front teeth starting to crumble, and I screamed, and I felt my head being pulled back again, and my head being smashed off the concrete on the floor, and I passed out. Felt pain, passed out. When I came round again, I was being dragged back into the lane, and I looked up, and there was a policeman and a policewoman dragging me back into Ashton Lane. I was absolutely terrified. I thought I was going to die that night, and they laid me down outside the Ubiquitous wine shop, which was white at the time. I think it still is white. And they laid me down. When I passed out, and when I came round again, I could feel my teeth were missing in the top row. There was blood pouring out my mouth. I was lying on the ground covered with blood, and I asked the question. I was crying, and I thought, what are they going to do to me now? And I asked the question. I managed to get out the question why, and the policeman said to me, just after he kicked me in the face, "This is what happens to black boys with big mouths." And I was kicked and kicked again. Eventually I passed out, and then eventually when I came round again, I kept screaming, why? And then I started thinking, I'm going to die tonight. The only thing I can do is to actually scream out for help. And some students that were passing by shouted that they were going to run and get help, and I think they ran to the Queen Margaret Union. An ambulance was called. The cops panicked. Students had come down to the lane and started shouting at the police officers about what had happened to me. And apparently this came out in evidence later that the wall of the Ubiquitous chip was covered with blood, my blood, from the kicking that I received from the police that night. And I was taken to the hospital very quickly. The students from the occupation, some lecturers and all that had found out, this is about some like 8, 9 o'clock at night, that I was in the Western Infirmary, and the place was then swamped with students, and the cops were refused entry by because they wanted to stand next to me. The doctors said, and the nurses said, look, he's absolutely petrified, he's terrified, look at the state of him, you're going to have to go and wait outside, and he's not going anywhere, he's not capable of moving. And when they came outside, they were obviously tackled by students and lecturers asking what they'd done, so it disappeared very quickly. And as a result of that, I had 3 teeth that were smashed out, was bruised, I was unable to walk for a week, and I had food that was ground for a store. And eventually, you know, for 2 or 3 years, found out later when the police had a psychiatrist examine me that I suffered from post-traumatic stress. I just thought I was fucking angry, to put it bluntly, rather than post-traumatic stress. But in the 4 years that followed, I became a full-time campaigner, and I pursued a civil action against the police. I had something like 4 or 5 court trials. I had 25 attempted arrests, and every demonstration I went to, you know, in Glasgow would be picked out as get him. I'm not saying I was any angel, because I was extremely angry, and I thought, I want revenge, and I want to get back at those cops and the system for what they've done for me. And very quickly, I started to meet people on the street who said this had happened to them, this is what the cops had done to them. And I was brought up in a relatively middle-class, protected environment in Liverpool, where I was supported to think that if the police did something, they did it right. Even though I was living literally, you know, minutes from the Toxteth area, where young black Afro-Caribbean males have been murdered for many years by police officers in the back of police vans, but I was always told by my family, no, you only get arrested by the police if you do something wrong. And I took up that civil action against the police and was determined to fight it. And I was told by the lawyers at the time and others that the odds were against me, that no person ever in Scotland had won a civil action against the police for a racist attack, and that my life would be made hell. And my life was made hell to a certain sense. I knew I couldn't walk down the street, and if I saw a police car, then I would have to move, and that my cards were actually marked, and I was told I had a 1 in a million chance of succeeding. And I remember at the time saying to my lawyer, I said, it's not about winning the case. I said, it's about lifting that big cloud that lives above me, that thing that I tried, that I got the word out there, because it doesn't really matter to me if the court or the judge decides in my favour. What matters is that I have told other people that this is actually what happened, and it's still going on today. And it took, in 1995, eventually we went to court, and I remember at that time it was a tactic I still deploy, saying to people to come to the court case, to fill up the court case, because I arrived with my mum and dad in the courtroom, and it was empty, and I said to a number of friends, comrades, whatever, at Glasgow University, well, I need that courtroom packed. And I remember the second day when the policeman gave evidence, I came in all cocky and smiles, like police officers do. They're trained on how to give evidence and come and give evidence, and I stood up, and I went out with my father at lunchtime. We went across the road, I rang up people who was at the art school in Glasgow University, said, we need people to come down. Went across the road to the mosque, and many of the respectable elders who were there, some of them politicians, saying, no, we don't want to come, we don't want to get involved. I just said, listen, I'm not asking to get involved, I'm not asking to take sides. Come to the court, sit and listen to what happened, and then make your mind up. And eventually, as the policeman was giving evidence, the doors opened, about something like 60 to 70 people from the Asian community walked in, and an atmosphere all of a sudden changed within that courtroom, because the courtroom was jam-packed. The policeman didn't know where to look, because he knew he was a liar. He knew that the state that he'd got me into, my spirits were uplifted, the family spirits were uplifted, and eventually, after the course of a week, the judge made a decision and came back and made a decision that he found the police officers guilty of what happened. And I won a civil action that made actual legal history, and it came as a shock to many people. But what I'd say as a result, to conclude from that and open it up to questions, is that there was, whilst I made legal history and was first and actually still, unfortunately, the only person to win, a black person to win a civil action against the police for a racist attack, there was 2 lessons that were learned after that night. The first lesson learned that night was by the police, and that was that this black boy's mouth just got bigger and bigger as the years went by. But the second lesson was learned by me, and that was that when you talk about freedom and justice, it's not handed to you on a plate by a legal system that is run like a gentleman's colonial club, surrounded by its vanity of wigs and gowns, shrouded in secrecy, relatively unchanged for over 400 years, all white and unaccountable, where it has one law for the rich and one law for the poor. We've always had to fight in this country for freedom and justice, and the more of us who believe that, the more chance we actually have of making a difference to ordinary people's lives. Thank you.